So, Janet, the government just amended the Citizen Initiative Act and could have removed the power of the chief electoral officer to ask a judge for clarity on whether a potential referendum question would violate the Constitution. Instead, the government expanded that power, and now the Justice Minister and Premier are opposing the use of the power. What do you think's going on here? Did the government just assume Gordon McClure wouldn't use the power? Did Mickey Amery not understand his own amendments, or something else?
Well, I think it's a classic example of unintended consequences. You know, they were focused on one part of the equation. They were focused on, how people can initiate questions and do petitions and that sort of thing. And so they were focused on what they could do to make it seem to citizens that it would be easier to initiate one of these referendums. But, as you said, they one of the stipulations was referendum questions had to be constitutional, and that they did give the power to the election commissioner. So I don't know how now you can criticize the election commissioner for using that power. And I just think you have to stop and wonder, what were the consequences? Why did we think this was so easy and we didn't think there was going to be unintended consequences?
Sabrina, what do you make of it?
I think that it's just like Janet said. I think that these consequences are biting Premier Smith and Mickey Amery in the butt. And I think that it's important that Albertans have the independence of the chief electoral officer to actually go to the court system and verify the constitutionality of these questions. I think it's not a small question that we're being asked. And, so much of what the government has already done is propaganda lensed. And I think it's important that we get the verifiability on this question.
Okay, and those who might be wondering at home, we were hearing Sabrina just fine, but her Wi-Fi isn't great because she's in the washroom on a Via Rail train currently. So we'll see how this goes. Mickey Amery argues, Janet, that if a referendum on separation were to take place, it would be up to the government, not the chief electoral officer, to decide how or if to implement the result. He's essentially saying, let's let this process play out. And if there are constitutional issues that arise from a yes vote, we'll deal with them after Albertans have had their say. What do you think of that argument?
Oh, well, I guess in a way you could say that's the way the Quebec referendum operated, right? There wasn't a yes vote, but had there been a yes vote, the federal government would need to decide what they were going to do next. And that's what the Clarity Act was all about, was setting some parameters where a sovereignty referendum could be successful. And the Clarity Act says you need a clear majority answering a clear question. Now, you could wait until after a referendum to declare on the constitutionality, but I think a lot of us thought that, vetting these questions beforehand was actually better for the public because, without vetting them beforehand, we have the chance that maybe this thing will pass, but it doesn't pass in the courts later. So I think if you're trying to sort of control public opinion, which is, of course, what I'm always focused on, if you're trying to control public opinion, better to know that you're asking a question to the public that's going to stick before you ask the question rather than after.
And the vetting will continue. McClure isn't backing down. So, Sabrina, let's play this out. If the judge says the question does violate the Constitution and the chief electoral officer decides it won't be put on a ballot, do you think that'll be the end of the story, or do you expect the government to try to continue to enable a referendum on separation?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think the question that many Albertans are asking themselves is waiting for Danielle Smith to show whether or not she is the separatist or not. I think that she has so far kind of claimed that this is all in the lens of transparency and making sure that all Albertans get their say. But she really hasn't strongly, I think, come out against it. And this is another notch in the side of Danielle Smith continuing to push separation. I honestly think that it risks the deals that we're going to try to make with the rest of Canada on things like pipeline projects or anything else, and it further risks Canada's negotiating position with the tariff. So I think the Premier and her caucus really need to come to the table and decide whether or not this is an important enough question to ask, or if it's going to jeopardize our economic future.
To be clear, Smith has said repeatedly that she opposes the idea of a sovereign Alberta leaving Canada. She wants it to remain within Canada. Janet, I mean, there's another issue here. The province could appear before the judge, could argue in favor of this question. There's no indication that would happen yet. But the whole process is supposed to be arm's length, right, from government. As a constitutional lawyer explained to us earlier this week, the chief electoral officer is independent. So if the government is seen to be trying to interfere with the office, the integrity of our elections or referendums could be called into question. I wonder if you think this move by the Justice Minister has already tainted this process.
I don't know if it's tainted the process, right? I think let's see what the answer from the courts is. I don't think they're just going to say yay or nay. I'm not a lawyer, but I expect that there would be some explanation for whatever the decision that they come to. But it's just a really good example of how the government is skating a very fine line here. On the one hand, the Premier said that she opposes separation, but she's trying to open the door for a fulsome conversation about separatism. So, I mean, that seems like a bit of a contradiction, but she would probably say, let people talk about it. People have the right to kick around these ideas, and she, as the Premier, should be facilitating them. But this is again unintended consequences. It's making sort of the debate more complicated. It's not going to satisfy people on either side, pro-separatism, anti-separatism.
Okay.
But there you go.
We'll watch to see where it goes, and we'll hopefully see Sabrina land where that train is going in Montreal soon. Appreciate you both making time.
Thank you.